In the early 17th century, a Dutch trading enterprise emerged that would reshape global commerce. This company endured for centuries and amassed extraordinary influence, surpassing any modern comparison in terms of economic power. When people speak of long-standing wealth and the foundations of modern finance, they tend to mention families such as Rothschild or Rockefeller, symbols of old dynastic capital. Yet very few recall the quieter Dutch institution that transformed the way trade, profit, and ownership worked.
This document represents a revolution.
This enterprise pioneered practices that would become essential to global markets. The creation of a formal corporation, the establishment of a marketplace where shares could be traded openly, and the introduction of a public offering in which individuals could buy a stake in the venture. The company did not operate in isolation. Its rise unfolded alongside the ascent of the House of Orange, whose growing political authority intertwined with the expansion of Dutch maritime power. What follows is the account of how this trading company and the House of Orange set in motion forces that shaped empires, altered economies, and laid the groundwork for the world of international commerce that would come centuries later. In the year 1580, a dramatic shift unfolded on the Iberian Peninsula when Spain absorbed Portugal in a personal union, placing two far-reaching empires under a single monarch and creating a maritime power whose reach stretched across Asia, Africa, and the Americas. This consolidation gave Spain immediate authority over Portugal's overseas domains, upsetting the balance of influence on the world's oceans and presenting a grave danger to the northern provinces that were still fighting to break away from Spanish rule. The Dutch suddenly confronted a vastly strengthened opponent, and they recognized that matching this expanded empire with force alone was impossible. Instead, Dutch leaders sought a different strategy, one built not on military might, but on the mobilization of private wealth. At the beginning of the 17th century, 7 trading groups combined their resources to form a unified enterprise known as the VOC, later referred to in English as the Dutch East India Company, created to conduct trade in the regions that Europeans broadly described as the East Indies, including the islands of modern Indonesia and Malaysia.
As the pieces locked into place,
although it outwardly resembled a commercial venture, beneath its sails it functioned as an instrument of economic confrontation, commanding armed vessels, maintaining soldiers, and constructing fortified posts across key trading routes.
We must secure the spice trade and solidify our economic conquests.
What set this organization apart was its decision to issue shares, enabling citizens of the Dutch Republic to invest directly in overseas trade and reap financial returns, allowing the company to expand on a scale previously unknown without relying on a monarch or imposing new taxes. Wealth was no longer tied to hereditary estates or noble privileges. It emerged instead from organized markets shaped by merchants who designed and directed this new system of enterprise, even as the House of Orange observed the development of this powerful institution throughout the Republic. The House of Orange was a prominent dynasty within the Dutch Republic, yet unlike the great royal families of Europe, this lineage held no kingdom and governed no vast estates, relying instead on a ceremonial title and a fragile position in a state increasingly dominated by merchants. As Republican leaders in Amsterdam pushed for greater civic authority and Spain sought to remove the dynasty entirely, the House of Orange found itself with neither land to administer nor traditional revenues to depend upon, forcing the family to choose between diminishing quietly or reshaping its role, within a changing political landscape. With feudal income no longer relevant, the House of Orange turned to capital, aligning its fortunes with the rise of the Dutch East India Company. Although the family did not manage the enterprise, their investment bound them to its expansion and gave them influence within a republic where ancestry alone no longer secured prominence. Over time, this association deepened, especially when two later members of the dynasty, William IV and William V, assumed the position of stadtholder senior officials whose authority extended over both the Dutch East India Company and the West India Company, the latter conducting trade across the Atlantic world. Through these roles, William IV and William V became figures of considerable power within the Republic and beyond, and as the company stretched its reach eastward, the House of Orange rose from traditional nobility to a status shaped by commerce, influence, and global ambition. The House of Orange still held no crowns, yet their influence increasingly rested on the financial strength tied to the Dutch East India Company, which carried the flag of the Republic while also advancing the quiet ambitions of a family rising through commerce rather than territorial rule. The Dutch East India Company operated less like a merchant venture and more like a sovereign power. Its immense resources allowed it to challenge established states, command private armies, and function as an imperial authority in its own right, its valuation surpassing that of many nations. During the company's height, from the early 17th century to the mid-18th century, more than 1 million individuals left the Netherlands for Asia aboard East Indiamen, large cargo vessels that embodied Dutch global ambition, carrying sailors, clerks, soldiers, and artisans employed to establish and maintain trading outposts in places such as Ceylon, Java, and Bengal. These workers operated ports, protected storehouses, negotiated with local leaders, and asserted Dutch interests, sometimes by force, forming the vast human network that powered the company's global reach and sustained its unprecedented profits. This expansion depended on three foundations: a state charter of exceptional authority, the capital of Amsterdam's financial elite, and the strategic support of the House of Orange. The charter, in particular, resembled a royal decree more than a commercial permit, granting the company sweeping control over Dutch trade across Asian waters and far beyond. The Dutch East India Company held powers usually reserved for monarchs. It could negotiate treaties, maintain armies, seize territory, and administer colonies, each action carrying the weight of state authority, even though decisions emerged from a boardroom rather than a royal court. With a fleet of nearly 150 merchant vessels, tens of thousands of employees, and a private force of about 10,000 soldiers, the company acted with the confidence of a maritime state, leaving its presence visible from the Persian Gulf to the shores of Japan. Its most decisive influence took hold in the East Indies, the heart of its global strategy. In 1610, the company secured permission to establish a trading post near the Siliwangi River, and by 1619 it had taken control of Jakarta, renaming it Batavia, a name that transformed the city into the administrative center of Dutch power in Asia for the next 3 centuries. From Batavia, governors directed policy, oversaw trade networks, and managed relations with surrounding kingdoms and chiefdoms, shaping local culture in ways still visible in language, cuisine, and architecture throughout Indonesia. Sustaining such an extensive system required enormous financial resources, and instead of depending on monarchs or short-term borrowing, The company created a structure in which citizens could purchase a share of its future, forming a new kind of economic partnership between enterprise and public. In August 1602, the Dutch East India Company opened its subscription to the population of the Republic, marking the world's first initial public offering, following a comprehensive charter signed earlier that spring, which outlined the authority and ambitions of the organization.
Dividends from the spice trade are unmatched.
Count them well, master. It is all
Once shares became available, investment poured in from influential merchant families who dominated Dutch civic life, linking their fortunes to a single, expansive enterprise and channeling wealth into the commercial heart of Amsterdam.
fresh spices from the Indies. Come and see.
This cooperation among rival elites raised a deeper question about the force capable of uniting competing households behind the same long-term vision, and the answer pointed once more to the stabilizing influence of the House of Orange and Nassau.
Shared vision for the future of the Republic.
The House of Orange supported this economic transformation, yet the dynasty increasingly relied upon it as political conditions at home remained unsettled. Amsterdam's merchants pressed for a stricter republican order, leaving the family suspended between ceremonial authority and unrealized royal ambition. Abroad, the situation was equally precarious, as Habsburg Spain still viewed Dutch independence as defiance, deserving severe punishment, and in such circumstances, traditional feudal structures offered no refuge, for the House of Orange held no serfs, no mines, and no claim to divine rule.
Dutch East India Company.
Instead, the family embraced a radical idea for its age: to build influence not through inherited land, but through financial power, shaping institutions that reduced uncertainty by making risk measurable and creating instruments that allowed enterprise to grow without reliance on hereditary wealth.
We must protect these investments.
At the center of this shift stood permanent shares, which introduced the possibility of freely transferring ownership in a global trading venture, and led to the creation of the Amsterdam Stock Exchange, the world's first organized secondary market.
Amidst the chaos, William observed the nascent practices of arbitrage.
Innovations followed quickly as traders began not only buying shares but speculating on future values, establishing practices of arbitrage and hedging that would later become fundamental to modern financial systems.
In 1602,
Yet behind the calculations and contracts, another force drove investment: the widespread fear of being left behind. As Dutch East India Company shares became one of the earliest historical examples of a speculative surge powered by collective urgency and anticipation.
before the market shifts. These intricate lines.
Beginning from an index value of 100 in 1600, shares of the Dutch East India Company climbed to around 1,000 by the 1720s, a tenfold rise that marked an extraordinary shift in how wealth and global expansion could be financed. Funding an overseas empire with public investment carried obvious dangers. Ships might be lost, conflicts might erupt, or trade routes might fail, but the Dutch introduced a legal safeguard that transformed enterprise forever: limited liability. Under this protection, an investor risked only the sum contributed to the company. Personal property remained untouched, families remained secure, and confidence in long-term investment surged, laying the groundwork for a principle still central to modern business law. The company also issued formal share certificates, stamped and signed, which could move freely between buyers across cities without royal approval or family inheritance, making ownership a transferable asset rather than a privilege tied to birth.
Intricate web of Dutch finance.
Dutch financial ideas soon moved far beyond the Netherlands, influencing economic thinking in Britain and later in America, carried through institutions, practices, and above all, by one individual from the House of Orange, William of Orange. William of Orange, born into the House of Orange-Nassau and holding the title Prince of Orange from birth, was shaped early by the merchant class of the Dutch Republic and their financial systems, though his greatest influence emerged abroad. By 1688, England faced a severe political crisis as King James II lost the support of Parliament and much of the population, prompting leaders to seek a Protestant successor with a legitimate claim. Their attention settled on Mary, daughter of James II, who was married to William of Orange, and when England called upon them, William of Orange sailed with troops and a governing philosophy forged in the Dutch Republic, one that linked political authority with financial stability. This intervention led to what became known as the Glorious Revolution, and soon after, William of Orange and Mary II assumed the English throne in a joint monarchy that marked far more than a change in rulers. The change that followed the arrival of William of Orange in England was not merely political, but fundamentally financial, as England adopted practices long established in the Dutch Republic. Under his reign, the country founded the Bank of England, created public credit, issued government bonds, and financed conflicts through capital markets, embedding Dutch financial methods into English law. Yet the Dutch influence on the wider world had begun even earlier, for in 1609, a vessel sailing under the Dutch East India Company reached the harbour of the place now known as New York City, and by 1624, the Dutch West India Company established New Amsterdam at the southern end of Manhattan. Though it appeared to be a modest trading station, its planned streets, active trade routes, and diverse inhabitants revealed a settlement designed in the spirit of Amsterdam itself, operating as a commercial outpost, already evolving into a financial center of the emerging Atlantic world, where credit, contracts, and international exchanges flowed with remarkable sophistication. When the British seized control in 1664 and renamed the settlement New York, they retained much of its Dutch legal structure, commercial practices, and financial routines, recognizing that these systems functioned effectively and could be integrated into their own institutions. Across the Atlantic, another transformation unfolded in Europe. During the 17th century, Amsterdam favored a model based on banking and public credit, while London preferred speculation and rapid market activity. But by the 18th century, the financial elites of both cities began to operate in coordination as bank-centered Dutch finance, aligned with the fast-moving market culture of London. Working together, Amsterdam and London forged a new form of economic dominance. Dutch strength in deposits, clearing, and disciplined public credit combined with British innovation in securities, rapid trading, and flexible markets, creating a financial model that would eventually stretch far beyond Europe. Through shared colonial links, especially the Dutch origins of New Amsterdam and the later British administration of the same settlement, these financial principles traveled westward, allowing New York to inherit legal frameworks, credit practices, and institutional habits from both cities, forming the early foundations of what would become a major financial center. Over generations, New York adapted these systems, transforming from a modest port into a powerful commercial hub, drawing upon the very tools that had once shaped Amsterdam and London, while gradually developing its own version of a global financial engine. The influence of Dutch financial thinking became visible across the world. from the chartered ports, once controlled by the Dutch East India Company, to the layout of early New York. From the London Stock Exchange to parliamentary financial reforms, Dutch ideas helped define modern corporate structures, banking rules, and market behavior. Even after the Dutch East India Company completed its last voyage, its innovations echoed through boardrooms and stock markets, influencing how enterprises were governed and how capital moved across borders. Yet, the company was not invulnerable. By the late 18th century, its vast empire began to show strain. Growth had outpaced oversight, corruption spread through its ranks, and the cost of defending far-flung outposts mounted as British and French rivals increased pressure on every front. Though the organization initially survived these contradictions, its authority gradually weakened, and beneath its imposing exterior, the structure became increasingly hollow, revealing the beginning of the end for a corporation that had once reshaped the world. As oversight weakened, decisions slowed, and many officials prioritized personal gain over the long-term stability of the Dutch East India Company, just as global markets shifted toward faster and more adaptable competitors and became increasingly resistant to monopolies. By 1795, the company's dominance had faded, prompting the Dutch state to intervene and nationalize its operations. After nearly 2 centuries, beginning in 1602 with a 21-year monopoly in Asian trade, the organization was formally wound down in 1796 as its once formidable charter slipped quietly into history. Although the empire itself dissolved, the company's framework of financial innovation survived, evolving into modern corporate law, international finance, and the structure of multinational enterprise that continues to shape the world today. In the modern Netherlands, the nature of influence has shifted from maritime command to financial strength. The country consistently ranks among the world's most competitive industrial economies and attracts investment on a global scale, with inward and outward flows of capital measured in trillions of dollars and international holdings that far exceed the nation's population size. In 1907, a new industrial power appeared when Royal Dutch merged with Shell Transport and Trading Company to form Royal Dutch Shell, a name that would dominate the international energy sector for more than a century, and again link Dutch commercial influence with a royal designation. This development was part of a broader pattern as Dutch institutions continued to exert considerable economic weight, with modern financial groups rising to become among the most powerful in Europe and carrying forward a legacy first shaped centuries earlier by the Dutch East India Company. Modern financial institutions that trace their origins to the Netherlands grew through late 20th century mergers, yet they still rely on Dutch legal frameworks and corporate structures that reflect principles first established during the era of the Dutch East India Company. Without the influence of that earlier institution, both the Netherlands and the global financial system would look markedly different. Many descendants of the merchants once connected to the Dutch East India Company now hold positions within major corporations, quietly shaping policy through foundations, investments, and board memberships. Their surnames rarely draw public attention, yet the organizational patterns they inherited appear across industries, from energy to banking and global logistics, forming part of a system often associated with figures such as the Rothschild family, the Rockefeller family, or J.P. Morgan, even though those later financiers worked within a model established centuries earlier by the House of Orange.
The House of Orange understood that power flowed.
The House of Orange helped construct a structure in which warfare, commerce, and finance became interdependent, laying the groundwork for a form of capitalism that others later expanded but did not originate.
The intersection of trade and finance.
However, the history of the Dutch East India Company also includes severe abuses, and it is essential to acknowledge the violence and exploitation that accompanied its expansion across Asia, including massacres, forced labor, and the suppression of local communities.
The spice trade. The indigenous people of the Banda Islands.
One example was the devastation of the Banda Islands, where much of the indigenous population was killed and survivors were enslaved as the company replaced them with Dutch settlers. Another was the Ambon incident, in which English and Japanese traders were executed after accusations of plotting against a Dutch fort.
In the spice-producing regions, local communities.
There was also the massacre in Batavia, where thousands of Chinese civilians were killed, an event remembered today as one of the most tragic episodes in the history of Jakarta. Alongside these events, systems of forced labor in spice-producing regions caused widespread hardship as local communities were compelled to work for the company's benefit. Violence was frequently used to suppress resistance, control trade routes, and dismantle indigenous political structures, revealing a side of the company's legacy defined not by innovation but by exploitation and coercion.
Need 20 hands on the manifest now.
The contributions of the Dutch East India Company to modern finance were significant, yet they must always be viewed alongside the darker chapters of its history. Still, from its rise to the emergence of Royal Dutch Shell, one clear pattern appears again and again. Capital and power have always been closely intertwined.
Financial innovation is not merely about wealth.
The House of Orange recognized early that financial influence could outweigh traditional authority, shaping a model in which trade and governance merged into a corporate state structure that expanded across centuries and continents, and ultimately helped define the systems through which the modern world manages money.
Gentlemen, our naval power...
Though the Netherlands no longer commands the oceans as it once did, Dutch capital now moves across borders with an influence that surpasses anything fleets could achieve, prompting a question that remains just as relevant today. If markets now hold a form of power once associated with monarchs, then who governs the markets themselves? Who holds authority when the authority is unseen?